Our last video was a summary of the gospel written exclusively in biblical language. It would certainly generate a lot of questions in a thoughtful listener, and perhaps I made it more complicated than it needed to be. I wanted to include basic ideas about God, Jesus, mankind, and individuals such as you and me, and what God expects of us. I was also careful not to include deep concepts that were added after the early church started preaching. The people converted on the day of Pentecost were given enough information to be saved, so I focused heavily on what Peter preached that day. Now, he probably assumed a lot of things because they were Jews and they knew a lot of other things to begin with. But later, Paul was preaching to Gentiles, and he assumed nothing about them, so I included material from his speech in Acts 17. I also included material from the later letters, though being careful not to include things like, for example, 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18, which is a prophecy, since there is no evidence that earlier believers knew about that prophecy, yet they were full-fledged Christians, so to speak. Any other material I included had to do with sin, which the Jews knew about, and Paul had already begun preaching in Acts 17. Is this summary perfect? Certainly not. It was my decision to include or not include a particular passage, and I could have made mistakes, and certainly I did. Is this summary a creed? No, I only use it as a teaching tool, not as a litmus test to determine whether another person is a real Christian. Okay, what if you're a member of a church that chooses to use a creed or statement of faith as more than a teaching tool? What do you do? Well, I think the first thing you and I have to start with is humility. I don't think it's appropriate to go to your church leadership and demand they stop using a creed. There are also varying degrees of how creeds are applied. Some use them rigorously in determining whether a new person can become a member. Others merely refer to them if there is a controversy, which may not happen very often. Some churches officially have a creed, but it is almost never mentioned. One approach would be to ask a church leader about the creed or statement of faith and to have him go over with you what is in there and why it is deemed essential teaching. You definitely don't want to be a divisive person while fighting division, because that's counterproductive. It would certainly be possible to make things worse rather than better. Also, you're not going to solve this problem for Christianity worldwide. Only Christ will accomplish that. We can only, as individuals, behave in a unified and loving manner as Christ commanded us and encourage others to do the same.